The Countdown is a YouTube program produced by Sapphire Aster Productions to interview guests on social, educational, sporting, and cultural issues affecting the Caribbean and the wider world.
Welcome to the Countdown. We will spend some time with Professor Dwayne Devonish, where we will talk about crime and violence in Barbados.
I think that is a bit also of a total breakdown in moral society because, like you had mentioned before, you find a lot of young parents now, some of them don't even know better themselves, and they're in a situation where they themselves are parents, So hence going back to the grandparents, situation, there were, the family was more close-knit, more stronger, in my opinion.
Much stronger, for sure.
And like you said, the illustration that you mentioned with the village, it takes a village, to really bring out that in a child, but we don't have that now. So how do we go from now going towards the future? Like, where should we begin back? Should we begin back from like zero age?
Well,
infants?
Here's the funny thing. Because this situation is grossly multifaceted and the causes themselves are grossly diverse, it creates a very difficult enterprise to consider how do we start. Because if you think about it, if you have these multiple fronts of causes, multiple fronts of manifestations of crime or violent behaviors, then it's difficult for someone. It's almost like when you go to a restaurant and there's so much on the menu, you so many options on the menu. It's so difficult to make a choice.
Yes.
So you could start at any point, and then realize that, oh, sure, I should start on this point. Now let's consider the science of all of this, because in criminology, which is the science and study of crime and criminal activity, the argument has always been brought to looking at what we call base principles or first principles. What is the most basic institution in society? The family, right? Now, the family, if you think about it, is the first ecosystem that a child encounters in their life and development cycle. If we know that the family, and I think we established that through the research, even here locally, or the lack or the emergence of family breakdown is one of the causes, and because it's the earliest of those causes, perhaps our interventions have to start at the family level. Now, I know that a lot of the interventions we speak about typically target youth. So they're youth targeted, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I am a strong believer that interventions should be broadened to target the family. So let's talk about the school nutrition policy in Barbados. The school nutrition policy is a policy that targets young people within the school environment. But guess what? Young people are going to leave the school after 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock, and they're going to go back home. Who surveils the eating practices or the nutritional practices of the family structure? So if you're going to have a school nutrition policy, it has to take into account the family structure, because that's first principles. So my argument is that it begins with dealing with family-based or family-targeted interventions where parents, guardians are included in this particular enterprise that we call crime solving or crime solutions. Now, what do those interventions look like? Now, if you think about it, at the heart of it, we know a breakdown in the family suggests that there's instability. So it might have a situation where two parents might not be able to deal with conflict, and that conflict spills over to the child. So our interventions have to focus on conflict resolution for families, not just the youth, for families, for parents and guardians. The conflict resolution would include things like developing things like soft skills. My grandmother would say soft skills are the hardest skills to learn. So soft skills would include things like emotional intelligence. How do you manage your emotions? So instead of acting out in anger or violent expression, how do you think about the emotion that you feel and be able to regulate it so it doesn't have to lead to destructive behaviors? It looks at how you lead as in a household. So leadership skills are critical for both parents, not just the father but the mother. Gone are the days that we say that the father is supposed to be the core of the household. The mother, we know that we have a matrifocal society, so there are many women-headed households that we have to consider. So how do we develop leadership skills in the women? As I said, when we can teach parents these things, we can teach them in a way or train them in a way that they can pass those skills over to the child. Because I made this point in an earlier forum on Brass Stats again, a local radio program here, that an emotionally unintelligent parent cannot handle an emotionally unintelligent child. If a parent is able to build him or herself in terms of certain skill sets, and I tell people there's no course per se on parenting, but the kind of competencies that you would require in a parent, you can teach those. And if you can get them instilled in parents, then they can pass those skills into young boys and girls. And as they grow up into adolescence and into young adults, if you think about it, they can handle social relationships. That's what soft skills do. They allow you to handle social relationships much better. And I'm not talking just about romantic relationships, but all types of relationships that they come in contact with. Yeah. But that was just the first tier of intervention. But I can go on. I mean, the other type of interventions we have to look at, honestly, would be those targeted at our institutions now. So the school, and this is what a whole of country approach looks like. Because I know people had criticized the Prime Minister and the government about what exactly is this whole of country approach. It sounds like a piece of rhetoric. But I myself have been making those claims long before the government that we really need a whole of country approach to tackle crime. And what does that look like? It looks like all of the institutions working together. So much problems, so many of the problems, that we've encountered in society are a direct result of social institutions not breaking down, really, but not just talking or collaborating with each other. So, for example, the police, we know, and the communities, the residential communities, are usually at a rift.
The countdown will be back in a moment.
Welcome back to the countdown.
So we also have to look at interventions targeted at our institutions. So beyond the family, the other institutions that are at play in society. So when people mention a whole of country approach, what does that look like? A whole of country approach requires that the institutions not just fulfill their roles individually, but they collaborate, they share knowledge and resources with each other. So the police sharing resources and knowledge with the community and vice versa. The school working closely with the family structure and the community and the government and the wider government. The private sector and civil society, not just fulfilling their roles in their own spaces, but working together, sharing the resources. A whole of country approach says that I can't sit in a silo. I'm a civil society organization. I have resources, but I'm keeping those resources under my own cover and not sharing those resources with a school. But the school, because the school is part of government, the school has to depend on government's budget. A whole of country approach means that all institutions work together, they talk with each other, they collaborate with each other. Yes. So that's the kind of, I would say, multifaceted or multi-tiered or multi-stakeholder intervention strategy that we have to take on board if we're going to get serious when it comes to tackling crime.
That will involve everybody collectively.
Exactly.
Everyone.
And
Not just
trust.
part or half, but everyone collectively.
But think about it this way. I use it as an analogy. The same way that we say that soft skills are critical for building competencies to harness and maintain social relationships in children as they grow and mature into adulthood. I think we need to kind of take that as an example for ourselves. Because if you think about it, a lot of institutions, whether it's the church, whether it's the school, communities, the justice system, which we'll talk about at some point. Um, you know, those the private sector, civil society, if those institutions do not trust each other, if those institutions don't have the wherewithal to work with each other, then we'll continue to see this degradation in our society. And of course, this uptick in crime and violence. We have to come to the point that even though this is within your bailiwick or this is within your social space, that it does not mean or it doesn't preclude you from sharing your knowledge, sharing your resources. Even like me, I'm an academic. If I had decided that not me, I'm not going to share all my none of my research. I'm not going to share any of my research with media because people will say, "Well, Devonish, I hear you in the media all the time. Why is it that you always in the media?" Because I think it's my responsibility as an academic not to just conduct the work as a function of science, but it is within my remit to make what I know as an academic known by everybody else. Everybody should be able to tap into that knowledge, tap into that as a resource.
Yeah, so that they can be aware of the situation and also use your research to help others.
Correct, to build the policies that they need, to execute the interventions that we want and that we require actually.
The countdown will be back in a moment.
Welcome back to the countdown.
I have also to mention I know I mentioned all of the institutions, but I have to mention the criminal justice system.
Okay.
I've done research on the criminal justice system for a number of years now, and I must say that the criminal justice system, the way it works, does not work to the benefit or the advantage of dealing with the problem or tackling the problem of crime. I'll give you an example. So you have a young person who goes into the criminal justice system. Let's say a very young person who is not an adult, so they have not reached the age of majority. So they're 16, they're 15. They go in front of a magistrate, and the magistrate says, "Tell me what you've done." And before the child speaks, shut your mouth in here. Don't say a word. I had this experience doing some research at the government industrial school with a group of girls. So these girls they're part of the institution. I think the offense committed was wandering. And that's when wandering was on the books. And this girl told me that she was trying to explain to the judge her case, her plight. But the judge the magistrate, he didn't want to hear any of it. And he said, like how we typically say, children should be, seen and not heard. That kind of context, that kind of mentality. And the child shut up. And she now is serving some time at JIS. And I'm not saying that this is a common occurrence in the judicial system, but because of the limited training that many of the judicial officers have when it comes to juvenile justice, a lot of these magistrates and judges are accustomed to dealing with adults or adult oriented cases. So they adjudicate those types of cases. But you need to have a special kind of intervention as a judicial officer when it comes to a child who's facing a particular court case or who's going through the justice system. And this goes for police, how police officers also treat uh, juveniles or children in conflict with the law. I would also say that the other thing that adds to this whole this the worsening of the crime situation is the sluggish movement of cases in the system. You have cases that are being called, like, that have been um, evident or birthed 20 or something 50 years ago, and they're now only reaching a judge or a court context, and people argue because of
That's happening
resources.
here in
And
Barbados.
this is in Barbados, and yeah, and you have a situation where then the wheels of justice is moving so slowly that you're not, people who, especially victims or families of victims, they're not getting the outcomes that they need. And it's unfortunate, because the other thing too, I mean, to be quite frank, because if you have people who, let's say, who are on remand, so their case has not been called yet, so they have not gone through the full adjudication. You have people who are on remand for years. Imagine, and let's say the case goes forward and they're actually acquitted, so they're not convicted. So when you check the evidence, so you have somebody who was innocent serving a bit of time
Spend a number of years
yeah,
unnecessarily.
yeah, through the remand facility. So we got to do better when it comes to that. I think the other thing that I would say that we must do better on is the enforcement side. So this is just going back out from the court system into the general enforcement quarters of our system. So things like customs, we still have a lot of guns coming through our legitimate ports, and I think we have to do better when it comes to border control and surveillance when it comes to the influx of contraband, illicit firearms, and something has to be done. Whether it's a human type of intervention, a technological type of intervention, but we can't have all of these guns just coming in almost unchecked, and getting into the system. And think about it, they're getting into the hands of the same at-risk, volatile young men who carry no conflict resolution skills, who are bent at vigilante justice or some form of vengeance. So this is a cocktail. So we have to deal with the enforcement and the surveillance. I mentioned already the community policing is, to me, leaves a lot to be desired. I don't think communities trust police enough, and you will see what we call, when they say communities, I'm talking about the at-risk communities that we would typically refer to as those communities that are rife with criminality and violence. And police themselves are very stereotypical, and biased in their approach. And understandably so, because you would expect in those types of communities you have a higher incidence of crime, a higher prevalence of crime, so they're a bit more careful as they go into those communities, and sometimes a bit more aggressive. But then that doesn't bode well for like restoring or even fostering relationships with the community. So you ask people to say, this whole dictum: if you see something, say something. But people might see something and keep quiet.
Yeah.
Because either one, they don't trust the police to respond or to be able to deal with the problem, and two, there may be a growing fear of reprisals, where people feel that if I say something, I might say something to the wrong person in authority that I should really be trusting, and that person shares that information with someone untoward.
Then you got to be afraid if you're going to be a target next.
Yeah. So people say, not me, I'm not saying anything. So we really have to do much better when it comes to restoring and maintaining that trust between communities and the policing sector.
To get that trust going, and as you say, we will have to involve everyone. That is a very, in my opinion, a very hard task. How do we even begin to start? With community trusting the police trusting the community. We getting the churches involved, we getting other organizations involved, so that we wouldn't just have like two persons trying to help solve or fix a situation. But how can we get come together and get everyone involved?
Well, yeah, it's very difficult, especially when trust has been broken and you're moving to repair that trust. So the reparations are very difficult to achieve. Now, I would say the first thing that has to be, I guess, confronted is the fact that we don't communicate well with each other as institutions. I think the first art of business is for institutions to come to the table and to admit where they've gone wrong and to start sharing information about not just their concerns, about how they can help fight this situation, this crime situation that we're facing. Now, when all of that is on the table, remember each institution, each facility has a set of strengths that can be leveraged with the crime fight. So there needs then now to be this kind of multi-stakeholder task force. And this doesn't have to be too big. We're not talking about 25, 30 people. We're talking about a few stakeholders who can offer now their resources and their talents to tackle the different causes, the different manifestations of crime. So it's almost like you're positioning an institution in light of its strengths, where it was like a school, for example. A school's strength is in education. So when we talk about schools might not be there to police, or they can't be there to police. That's what the policing to do. But a school can pull their weight by ensuring that educational reform, or I say school, but I'm really talking about the Ministry of Educational transformation. That and of course the cluster of stakeholders that fall under their remit, schools and education institutions, that they could consider how do we reform education in a way that our young men and women who typically have been ostracized or marginalized in the past, that they can now benefit from this new form or new stream of education, whether it's revising the curriculum, accommodating different types of teachers and teaching styles, providing a greater set of opportunities for qualifications and not just the traditional academic qualification. So how do we reform the education sector that is much more inclusive, okay, that broadens the accommodation of needs of these people? So that's schools. So then you have the criminal justice system looking at itself. So we've fallen short when it comes to the movement of cases through the court system, or we've fallen short when it comes to rehabilitation programs because we have limited resources when it comes to rehabilitation and even reintegration. So who can we tap into, and what can we leverage to better improve it? And that's where collaboration comes in. So if you think about it, if this different institutions start talking on the table, so that's where we start building trust, sharing out their needs, explaining where they can actually fight crime or fight this particular situation, this phenomenon in their own way, in the way that they know best. Then you'll start building very slowly the body of trust that we need among these institutions. Now, again, nothing is perfect in this world, so we know things will fall short. I am a big believer that we need to have a monitoring and evaluation system in place, because once we have these types of institutions work together, there should be some oversight body or mechanism. I don't know what that would look like, that would allow for a kind of a tracking and evaluation of not just outcomes, like these things are actually leading to the outcomes that we want, but processes, whether things are actually moving and whether the implementation is actually working, because that's another downside when it comes to finding or executing solutions. And the downside is the implementation deficits that we've suffered. We've had a very good track record in the Caribbean when it comes to writing and drafting policies, documents, strategies. But when it comes to that execution, we fall flat on our face. So we have to do better when it comes to mobilizing implementation. And it's not just about putting the right resources, but having the right people working closely together and ensuring that people are involved from the very start. Because one of the key reasons for implementation failure is the lack of involvement or limited involvement of the people for whom these interventions are being designed.
The countdown is brought to you with the compliments of Inaudi's Transport and Tours, reliability and convenience every ride. Black Diamond's Academy of Dance, shine bright like a diamond. Sarah Photos, capturing unforgettable moments. Karma Photo boasts Good Vibes Come Around. Graphics, Multimedia and Design. Discover Digital. We take the worry out of web development. Estilo Executive Chauffeuring, Style all the way. Evergreen Adventures, the exclusive choice. Miller's Entrepreneurial Services, Let's Connect. Celebration of Life's Journey, Embracing 50. Sapphire Aster Productions, producing engaging content for the world.
Stay tuned for part 3 of this
You've
episode.
tried almost everything else. And, if you're doing the same thing every time and getting the same results,
You got to do something different.
there we go.
You have to.
We have
It
to.
makes no sense.
Some people just throw their hands in the ears and
Yeah.
in the air and give up.